Some buildings in my neighborhood stay empty forever. Now I know why. Part 4. I don't think I'd ever been so happy to see Jenna as I was that night. Her bag was on the sofa. An empty jar of pickles and a loaf of bread sat on the kitchen table, and my roommate lay fast asleep in bed. I stood in the doorway of her room, overwhelmingly comforted by the sight of her curly auburn hair falling over freckled shoulders, her face buried in her arms, body rising and falling serenely. For me, sleep didn't come as easily. 2 glasses of wine calmed my nerves, but lying alone in the darkness of my room, Louise's story replayed itself again and again in my head. And, as I slipped into dreamland, I was repeatedly jolted to full consciousness by an intermittent sound from outside. Drip, drip, drip. I woke at 10 the next morning. A Sunday. Jenna was already gone. The pickle jar and loaf of bread were still on the kitchen table, now accompanied by a half-eaten apple and an empty foam package of raw chicken. Strange choice for breakfast, I thought. And Jenna was famously not a morning person. I reasoned she'd been guilted into picking up an early shift, and went about making coffee. I'd received a new email from Adrian. She'd sent me a large PDF attachment. Millie, I did it, dude. Your magical guidebook is translated. Here's part 1. I'll send part 2 as soon as I clean it up a bit. This shall forever serve as a testament to my undying love for you, because it was a pain in my ass and I have midterms this week. I saw you called yesterday. I'm going to assume it was about our aforementioned bulgogi date, because if you're looking for the opportunity to prove your undying love for me, I thanked her and promised we'd get that bulgogi as soon as her midterms were over. Then opened her translation of my little black book. It was hard to get through, and confusing, and somewhat contradicting, and it sounded very, very old. Here is the summary as I understood it. When God created the world, angels would descend from heaven and commune with man. Some of these angels, referred to in the book as the fair ones or the Nephilim, preferred earth to heaven and wished to stay here forever. As angels, they could present themselves in any form they wished. As fire, as flora, as creatures, as giants, or as men and women. They became enamored by earthly women, took many wives, and lost themselves in earthly excess and degradation. Alcohol, sex, gluttony, violence. They bore half-human children. They used their shape-shifting abilities to take advantage of credulous humans, hoarded gold, and coveted worship as though they were gods themselves. When God brought the great flood of Noah, he wished to destroy the fair people along with the rest of his sinful creation. But the fair people took the form of fish. So God sent a legion of angels, led by Saint Michael, to round them up. There was a great battle, and the fair people were all captured and brought before their Creator, as punishment for their wicked ways. They were banished to the pit for all eternity, banished from both heaven and earth. That was where the account ended. I had no idea what fallen angels had to do with cryptic Hebrew symbols or creepy abandoned buildings or cultists practicing midnight rituals with jackhammers. Blacklight, Louise had called them. Was she right? Had Blacklight, under the guise of a Christian organization, actually called forth otherworldly creatures? Were these entities responsible for the murders and disappearances 10 years before? Was Blacklight back in town for round 2? With a shudder, I recalled the 2 digging men I'd seen the night before. I remembered what Louise had said. The stories the homeless people told, humans with beaks, humans crawling up the sides of buildings. The interviews I'd completed. The unnatural flock of pigeons. The snake poking its head out of a metal gate. The Nephilim could present themselves in any form they wished. The Nephilim, the fair people, had been beautiful, but they'd undergone untold millennia of divine retribution. Maybe their shape-shifting skills had become rusty. Maybe pigeons hadn't yet evolved when they were around. Maybe they'd forgotten what a human being looked like. I googled Blacklight. Millions of hits. 6 useless pages of links later, I refocused my search to Reddit. There, I found one thread, longish, with months and even years between some of the posts. The oldest was from 2008, when Reddit was barely more than an anarchic cesspool. Danger Dam in 9999. Anyone heard of something called Blacklight? So I know everyone says so. But this is 100% true. My cousin lives in a little town in Wyoming. Not gonna give you the name B, see I don't want people going looking for the place. And everyone in this town knows it's haunted. Not like it's some sort of bar talk rumor or Bigfoot or anything. People know there's weird shit that goes down there. Like, there's places people won't even go. There's this field that supposedly could be drilled for oil, not sure I'm saying this right. I don't know shit about the oil industry, but no one will touch it. 3 companies have bought up the land in 10 years. And all 3 failed miserably. 2 had fires. And the 3rd had a bunch of issues with vandalism and shit being stolen and people getting sick. Apparently 3 workers died after being poisoned. The only thing my cousin ever witnessed himself was a cult. It was right when he moved there. He was biking home from his friend's place late at night. His friend lived way out in the boonies. He says he saw a fire in the distance, and a group of people all dressed in black standing in a circle, doing a strange dance all in unison and humming. He says it didn't sound like humans humming, but more like the grumbling of some machine, and it scared the shit out of him. The next day, an older kid at school said they were called Blacklight and that they prayed to ancient gods who lived on Earth before humans did. Has anyone else heard of Blacklight? Okay. Not exactly the most helpful thing in the world, but a few phrases stood out to me. The hum. The black clothing. I recalled Nancy's words. There are some places even the homeless won't go. Next, I read some of the responses. Witch cults that created rain, probably bullshit. Mutilated cows. Probably bored teenagers. Some useless speculation. Then another personal narrative. This one from 2013. Petty Pretty Little Bi Girl 22,435. Shit guys, I know these people. I live in Canada. And they came here too. My mom's a property manager, and she rented them a space in a strip mall. People say the same thing about my town as the Opus does about his. Like, there's a few places that are supposedly haunted. Or fairy territory, that's what the older people call it. A lot of them are descendants of Irish immigrants law. So yeah, there was a murder. There was a girl from my school. A senior, and she disappeared. Everyone just thought she'd run off with a guy. A lot of people do that, our town's kind of a posse. But they found her in the woods a couple miles out of town and it looked like a wild animal had mauled her. After that, kids would sneak into the woods to prove they have balls and shit. And they'd come back with stories about pale white mutant people with 6 arms and beaks and shit like that. And all the old people would say to stay away. And then there was the church. They didn't call themselves Blacklight though. It was like something Order of Book of Genesis. And they were really weird. They kept on trying to talk to the old people. Tried to get out of them where all the fairy hills were. But no one trusted them. I think they were a cult. People with beaks. As Louise had described. A murder where the victim had been mauled. But the post that really set me in the right direction, the one that completely changed my perspective on the situation, was several scrolls down from 2015. XXNAD is running XX. Blacklight isn't a cult. They've been to my town twice in 20 years. I live in South Dakota. They're very secretive. And they don't like to discuss what they do, but it's got nothing to do with evil entities. Well, it sort of does. But they're not conjuring the spirits. We get people with beaks and too many arms, too. Animals that kind of look like animals, but are wrong in some way. Every decade or so there's a rush of them. Then they run out into the Badlands and just kind of live there. You know where they're hiding because you'll find chewed up rabbits and birds and whatever else. And you know it's best to stay away. They're not discriminate, they'll eat anything, but they're also not above eating a human if one's available. We've just kind of learned to deal. They don't bother us. We don't bother them. Some people call them skinwalkers. Or fleshgates. Blacklight doesn't. I don't think they have a name for them. But yeah, Blacklight. They come around whenever there's a bunch of new skinwalkers at the same time. There's some sort of stitching that divides our world from other dimensions. And every once in a while The seams come loose in places where the walls between dimensions are thinner. And things, otherworldly things that aren't supposed to interact with humanity, sneak through. My town is one of those places with thin walls between worlds. Probably the Opus's town, too. There's a few of them. Anyways, Blacklight comes around and patches the holes between dimensions when there's a leak. My dad says there's some sort of Christian order, founded by a priest who got kicked out of Catholicism for messing around with the occult and trying to talk to angels. But he doesn't know much, and I know enough not to ask too many questions. They know what they're doing, and I think it's best to leave it at that. Finally, I came to the final post in the chain. It had been written only 2 weeks before. Part-time Disney Princess 1998. OMG guys, I think they're in my town now. My town must be one of those places with thin walls between universes. It's called Wyatt, Ka. There was a bunch of mutilated animals that people found. And now some weird group is operating out of an abandoned video store. No one ever comes to our town. There's like 200 people here. This is crazy. Wyatt. I knew Wyatt. It was a few miles outside Bakersfield. I'd driven through there many times to visit my cousin in Tulare County. Dusty little stretch. All but a ghost town. And apparently, Blacklight had set up shop. Skinwalkers. Nephilim. Whatever they were. They were responsible for the murders attributed to the Mid-City Mauler. The Seal. The Stitches had come loose in Koreatown 10 years ago, and they'd swarmed into our dimension. Blacklight hadn't summoned them. Blacklight had stopped them. I thought about all the stories I'd heard, everything I'd coaxed out of the good people of Koreatown. Ren's account took place 10 years ago. The rest of them, Isabel and the Parrot Pigeons, Daniel's snake, Emma's hypnotism by whistle, were all from the last 2 weeks. Nothing in between. The Redditor from South Dakota stated that Blacklight came to his town every decade or so. Whatever Blacklight had done in my neighborhood 10 years ago. Whatever spell they'd cast. Whatever protection they'd provided, it was wearing off. And they needed to return. They needed to come back before things got worse. Before more people died. I needed to go to Wyatt and find them.